One.
Kia ora. Today we are here speaking about the special education policy and its spawning of resource teachers. What do RTLB say about their new role? So this is for the Learning and Behaviour paper for the Agents of Change, and this is by Alison Kearney and Janice Carroll Lind. Today I'm here with Grant Henderson, who is the principal of Titahi Bay North School. And after reading this article, I thought it would be good to get some feedback from a principal, because there were major barriers in this article that I read identified, and one of them was resistance from teachers and principals towards the RTLBs, confusion about the RTLB role, inappropriate principal and teacher expectations, and time constraints. So a lot of those were related to how principals feel about our service. So I thought, well, let's get a principal and let's talk to that principal about how they feel. So could you just give us a little bit of how you feel resistance from teachers and principals? We can start there.
One of the first things around resistance is the fact that the itinerating model that has been preferred to be used since the policy of 1999 has meant that you have a complete stranger really who's called an RTLB, who comes in and is meant to suddenly enable a whole bunch of crucial relationships for the betterment of the identified students or learning program, or in some cases a student with significant need. And so the reason why
forced, do you?
I feel the it goes against a lot of the research that, especially for Māori and Pacifica students, that talks a lot about the need to build relationships. Relationships take time, and if you're an unknown person coming into a school, you are a stranger. So I think the first port of resistance is around the fact that despite the efforts of a liaison model and all the rest, the reality is most referrals are made, a complete stranger comes in to support the school and a student and the whānau. So I suppose that's where the first part of the resistance comes. The second part of the resistance comes from the fact that people's experience of working with the RTLB, some of that can be dependent on the nature of the referral previously. But if you've had a bad experience of collaborative work, then you've immediately got the first barrier of resistance. And again, it's relational, because if they happen to know the person who's coming in, then of course that all changes. And then I suppose the third part for principals especially are the requirements and the need to be seen for principals to be ensuring that they're doing their best to include young people who may have a number of other issues that require support and guidance from a number of other agencies. And unfortunately, the RTLBs may be the first, but may not be the critical agency that the principal needs. So,
one of the other things discussed in this paper was confusion with the RTLB role, not really understanding our role, or not really liking our role, maybe.
Well, I suppose it goes way back to, as you know, I was lucky enough to work for SES when SE 2000 came into being. Now, one of the critical elements of the good process that occurred in 1999 through to 2001 was the fact that the Ministry of Education produced a number of documents. It also produced a number of professional learning opportunities, or PLD, including centralised workshops for SENCOs, and all of this, and then they also had trainers that went around and worked with schools looking at their special ed policy, their special ed procedures. So you had quite a significant number of different resources that helped people to understand the various roles that were coming in. However, I say 2001 because 20 years later, I don't believe anybody's really clear around any role that whether that be the SENCO, whether that be the learning support coordinator, whether that be the RTLB, whether that be the social worker in school, whether that be the DP, AP, who has pastoral oversight, whether that be your guidance counsellor in a high school setting, whether that be your drug and alcohol counsellor in a high school setting. So you've got all these people who it seems that what we've done is added bits on, but we've actually not really thought about, so what is their contribution going to be so that we get back to the vision of SE 2000, which was a world-class education system inclusive for all. Now, the other part that I see around the RTLB role is, and I know that I spoke about this in our first video clip, is to ensure that the reality for most RTLBs is that these are top-notch teachers who have learned to adapt learning programs for students that they've had in their classes. Now, to me, the role is about being able to access that knowledge to help other teachers develop their own kit of skills and ability.
Absolutely.
So whether that's currently in the role, and I think the third thing that always gets in my craw a little bit is the fact that in the last 7 or 8 years, a number of RTLB have talked about working the intervention through somebody. Now, the analogy I would use around that is working through somebody is not working with somebody. It's actually what we used to call drop and go planning and intervention. And that was one of the real criticisms of the old group special ed services, was that they would literally run in, drop you some planning and run off to the next thing.
So you don't see it as building teacher capacity, having an RTLB there, supporting the teacher, upskilling the teacher, or you don't see that happening?
I think the critical element around building teacher capacity is one has to be aware that was that part of what the teacher had initially identified in their referral, and I'll keep coming back to that. Was that what the teacher asked for in the referral? Two, if they had asked for that, is the RTLB able to deliver that component of work? And then three, I think one of the critical elements is how is working through someone helping students who may have already lost confidence or faith in their teacher. Because the reality of it is teachers will have tried a whole bunch of different things to try and get kids engaged and underway. And so you keep coming back to, I keep coming back to relationship.
So if we move on
markedly for a student until we all change together.
Right, work collaborative. Now what about time constraints?
Time is one of the big things in our sector at the moment.
I know a lot of teachers don't want more meetings. I know that's one of
Well, again, I think this is where the current model is of helping, because the case loading and all the rest. When you're trying to touch as many students as you can and get their interventions going, you have to meet, and again you're working through somebody else, so you have to instruct them. And so what happens is very, very quickly you end up, as I said, the criticism of the old group special ed service was that they would turn up, they would meet with you, they would give you a plan, and then they'd run off somewhere else. That's not a true itinerating model.
No.
The itinerating model is a person who comes in and works for a concentrated time with the people in the current setting.
Yeah, well, I think with He Pikuro, that's the way we're working more. So what about if we think about a range of solutions to overcome these? So in this article it said there was a real focus to, as you were speaking, develop effective relationships with teachers, better provision of information, professional development, and reprioritising of funding. And that, teacher training, I think.
Well, I think it starts way back, as you said there, at teacher training. What we've tended to do in special ed is that the horse is bolted out of the stable and run around the field 3 times before we actually decided, let's do something different. So we've got to go way back to when we start training our young people. So programs like Incredible Years for Teachers, programs like the Positive Behaviour for Learning, programs like the Autism Spectrum programs that are up on the ministry website, how to adapt learning programs, how to write a really simple class IEP, how do you build a class treaty, how do you build a class value system. All of those things should be in a beginning teacher education program, right? Secondly, then we come forward and we come forward to when most teachers around about their 3rd or their 4th year, and they get a couple of tricky ones in there. And I think this is where I think the United States probably has it right and we have it wrong. The United States has federalised funding, right? Schools actually don't have SEG in the States. It's all federalised. So I think that's the first thing about reprioritising of funding. Second thing is to be really, really honest, and this would help with the relationship, is that if every school had its own RTLB, its own psychologist, or it shared it, like in my case, we may share an RTLB and a psychologist with 2 other schools. Right? That would be way better than what we currently got. Now, what it also would mean is that person becomes connected to the community. They are then seen as an integral relational person on the staff. Parents then get to know them because they're on a school staff, right? And you know how I was talking about the opportunity to second? It may be that what happens is 3 years from now, that person would go back into a classroom and another staff member would go into that role. So therefore what you're getting is that you're getting people walking in the shoes, understanding the difficulty.
I think we are moving
viable outcomes
for students. Okay. Yeah. So do you think we're sort of seen more as an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, and you would prefer to see us be a bit more proactive from earlier on?
Look, I think we've got to be honest and say, look, we need an ambulance, all right? Because I've heard the analogy, ambulances at the bottom of cliffs and all that. Well, the cold reality of it is, you need ambulances anyway. So that's the first thing. What we've got to do better is ensure that we have enough support around the ambulance to ensure that the patient is only slightly injured, not critical. And I think that's probably where we're doing it wrong, is that if we talk of the patient being our students, most of them are either on life support or about needing the shock treatment to get